there anything in your career that you would go back and change?
I know the leg drop doesn't look like a tough move, but most people don't realize as I started wrestling in '77, equipment wasn't like it was. It was a 22-foot boxing ring, and it was like a concrete road that had bumps and holes in it. I mean, it was the most dangerous ring I'd ever been in. It makes a big difference when you're in equipment that's really good stuff. So all those years dropping that leg in those rings, with the board sticking up or landing on my tailbone, oh my God, what was that, a rock in the ring? My arms were big, and I should have used the sleeper. No bump. I think I'd have been in a lot better shape with my spine and my...
Nick Hogan is no longer keeping quiet. In the days after his father, wrestling legend Hulk Hogan, passed away, Nick began dropping subtle hints about the truth he had been carrying for years. At first, his words seemed like a grieving son's, emotional reflections, but beneath them lay accusations that would shake the wrestling world. Now, Nick has stopped hinting and has begun naming names. He is exposing the very people who, in his eyes, betrayed his father when he needed them most. For decades, fans thought they knew everything about Hulk Hogan's life.
I was on the pain pills. I did have doctors just writing prescriptions after prescriptions. And all of a sudden, it becomes this vicious cycle. As they were giving me the pain meds, I was in crazy pain. I couldn't even function. But as soon as things started to wind down, they would keep giving me the pain meds. It got to a point where when I had the 10th back surgery, the pharmacy would call me, your prescription's ready. And I would go like a dog chasing a bone, I'd go pick it up. Then finally, I just looked at myself and I said, I'm not in pain. I don't need this. My body hurts from all the wrestling injuries, but I'm not in this excruciating pain that I can't live with. I can live with this, the amount of pain I have.
He was the face of professional wrestling, larger than life in and out of the ring. His rise to fame was meteoric, his career filled with championship belts, sold-out arenas, and Hollywood appearances. But with that spotlight came controversy, messy lawsuits, a scandalous divorce, and a family often torn apart by dysfunction. Still, no one could have predicted the news that broke on July 24, 2025. At the age of 71, Hulk Hogan, real name Terry Bollea, was gone. For millions of fans, it was a shocking loss. For Nick, it was the end of a long struggle that he had quietly witnessed from the inside. When Nick spoke out, it wasn't just to honor his father's memory. It was also to expose a heartbreaking truth, a web of betrayal and manipulation that...
I was on the pain pills. I did have doctors just writing prescriptions after prescriptions. And all of a sudden, it becomes this vicious cycle. As they were giving me the pain meds, I was in crazy pain. I couldn't even function. But as soon as things started to wind down, they would keep giving me the pain meds. It got to a point where when I had the 10th back surgery, the pharmacy would call me, your prescription's ready. And I would go like a dog chasing a bone, I'd go pick it up. Then finally, I just looked at myself and I said, I'm not in pain. I don't need this. My body hurts from all the wrestling injuries, but I'm not in this excruciating pain that I can't live with. I can live with this, the amount of pain I have.
He says, led the Hulk Hogan's lonely and painful final years. Nick didn't initially launch into a direct attack. Instead, he shared 20 emotional photos of his father on Instagram. At first glance, it looked like a son paying tribute to his dad. But woven into the captions were subtle messages hinting at what had really happened in Hogan's last years. Nick revealed that he had moved back to Florida and thus to be close to his father.
I gave that man everything. I gave him everything that I had. I was honest, I was a good wife, I was truthful, I never cheated on him. My kids to this day are still reeling that they can't get their feet back on planet Earth, and I can't get my life back on track either. I don't know, what am I supposed to do, start over now at 57, and I don't know where I fit in this world anymore.
While he described it as family bonding, his words suggested something deeper, an effort to shield Hogan from people he described as circling wolves. He had witnessed his father being isolated, lied to, and emotionally drained by people who claimed to love him. For Nick, it was like watching a slow collapse while being powerless to stop it. The first betrayal Nick described was also the most personal.
Just learned that Hulk Hogan passed away. I mean, when you heard the news, what was your first thought?
Well, I was almost shocked because he was one of those guys who was larger than life. You just assumed, and he didn't appear to age. So you never thought that the last time you saw Hulk Hogan would be the final time you saw Hulk Hogan.
By 2025, his sister Brooke had completely cut ties with both parents. She accused them of emotional mistreatment, stretching back to her childhood, and she claimed it sometimes turned physical. Brooke secretly married in 2022 and welcomed twins in January 2025. Events she didn't share with either parent. For Hulk Hogan, who had once been so protective of his daughter that he wouldn't let her date, being excluded from the biggest moments of her life was devastating.
More questions. Hey, Hulk Hogan just passed away.
What?
Hulk Hogan just passed away.
Who?
Hulk Hogan.
Oh, no.
Yeah, just now.
Oh man, guys, we just got some really terrible news. I'm so sad to hear this. Hulk Hogan just passed.
Nick said he had to watch his father's heart break again and again as Brooke remained absent. Her estrangement was not just about old family issues. It symbolized the permanent fracture of the Hogan family, but Brooke's absence wasn't the only source of pain. Hogan's ex-wife, Linda, whom he divorced in 2009 after a long and bitter separation, still loomed over his life. Even in 2025, she was publicly attacking him. In March of that year, just months before Hogan's death, Linda posted emotional videos accusing him of being a sex addict and a liar, reviving old allegations of abuse and infidelity. For Hogan, who was already weakened by serious health problems, these public attacks were crushing. For Nick,
you and Hulk were once good friends.
Yeah.
What's the likelihood of that ever being repaired?
Never.
What?
Can't trust him. I'm not friends with anyone I don't trust. I have to have a trust with someone to be their friend. And he's the one that ratted me to Vince when I tried to unionize.
Ventura's explanation of how he discovered the betrayal was equally shocking.
I found that out under federal deposition when Vince was put under sworn, and he didn't hesitate at all. I told my lawyer the story, and in deposition you could ask about anything. And so I wanted to know who ratted me in the locker room, because there were no agents, no one from the office was in there when I did it. So it had to be one of the boys. And when my attorney said, Mr. McMahon, has there ever been a union in wrestling? And Vince said, no. He said, has anyone ever tried to? And Vince said, well, I think Jesse Ventura spouted his mouth off about it once before. And my attorney said, did you hear Mr. Ventura? No. Well, then how do you know he did? With no hesitation, Vince went, Hulk Hogan told me. And I didn't show any emotion, but I almost tipped over in the chair because he was my friend. And I thought, but then I understand why. When we went to court, I saw in WrestleMania 3, Hogan got paid more than all of us combined. Now, why would he want a union when he's getting taken care of? Imagine that, WrestleMania 3, 93,000 people, and he got more than Andre the Giant and all the rest of us combined. If there was a union, would that happen?
It was unbearable to watch his father endure such humiliation after decades of turmoil. The betrayals Nick witnessed went beyond family drama. He claimed that people in Hogan's inner circle, friends, business partners, even his wife, Sky Daily, were part of a coordinated effort to hide his father's declining health. In May 2025, Hogan underwent major spinal fusion surgery. It was far riskier than anyone admitted publicly. Complications included damage to his vocal cords, difficulty breathing, and eventually the use of feeding tubes. Yet to the outside world, everything was fine. Nick was there, watching his father suffer in silence, while others insisted he was doing phenomenal. He described how Jimmy Hart, Hogan's longtime friend, and Eric Bischoff, his business partner, both played roles in downplaying the truth. To Nick, it wasn't just dishonesty, it was a denial of his father's dignity. The only person who tried to break the silence, ironically, was someone who had once betrayed Hogan deeply, Bubba the Love Sponge, the radio shock jock who had been involved in the infamous sex tape scandal years earlier. In June 2025, Bubba began making alarming claims that Hogan was in the ICU on a ventilator, and possibly in a medically induced coma. Instead of admitting that parts of this were true, Hogan's circle rushed to discredit him. Sky Daily posted on Instagram that Hogan's heart was strong and he was not in a coma. Jimmy Hart went so far as to claim Hogan had been at karaoke. For Nick, the lies were excruciating. He knew the reality, but he was forced to watch those closest to his father protect an image rather than the man himself. On July 24, 2025, the facade collapsed. Hogan suffered cardiac arrest at his Clearwater Beach home and was rushed to Morton Plant Hospital. At 11:17 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Only then did the truth come out. Reports revealed that Hogan had been battling renal failure, severe COPD, and fluid overload. He had been incubated, relying on machines to survive, and was eventually sent home because there was nothing more doctors could do. The wrestling world was stunned. Fans, wrestlers, and media personalities alike expressed anger that the truth had been hidden from them. They had been robbed of the chance to properly say goodbye to one of the sport's greatest legends. To understand the layers of betrayal in Hogan's life, Nick pointed back to the scandal that haunted his father for years, the infamous sex tape. In the mid-2000s, as his marriage to Linda was collapsing, Hogan was struggling emotionally. He confided in Bubba the Love Sponge, a man he considered a close friend. Bubba not only welcomed him into his life, but encouraged him to sleep with his wife, Heather Clem, framing it as a way to relieve stress during his divorce. What Hogan didn't know was that hidden cameras were recording everything. At least 3 separate encounters were filmed without his consent. Bubba even talked openly about using the tapes for blackmail or retirement money. In 2012, the nightmare became public when a former employee leaked the footage to Gawker Media, which published excerpts. For Hogan, the humiliation was unbearable. He later testified in court that he had no idea he was being recorded and felt physically sick when he learned of the betrayal. The tapes also contained audio of him using racial slurs, which surfaced in 2015. The fallout was catastrophic. WWE cut all ties with him, erasing him from their history books overnight. The scandal cost him millions, destroyed his public image, and left him permanently scarred. For Nick, the sex tape betrayal was the blueprint for everything that followed. His father, a man who gave so much to those around him, was constantly used and exploited by the very people he trusted most. Whether it was friends, business partners, or family, Hogan's trust was repeatedly weaponized against him. By the time of his death, the man who had once commanded stadiums of screaming fans was left surrounded by lies, secrecy, and broken relationships. Nick's decision to speak out after his father's death was not just about setting the record straight. It was about reclaiming his father's dignity. He wanted fans to know that behind the smiling appearances and upbeat social media posts, Hulk Hogan had been fighting battles most never saw. He wasn't just fighting illness, he was fighting betrayal, loneliness, and the crushing weight of a legacy shaped as much by scandal as by glory. For Nick, the silence is over. His father's story, in his eyes, deserves to be told truthfully, no matter how uncomfortable it makes those who are closest to him. For Nick Hogan, watching his father go through one of the most humiliating moments of his life was heartbreaking. The release of Hulk Hogan's private tape wasn't just an embarrassing scandal, it tore apart the image he had built for decades, damaged his relationships, and left him cut off from many friends and colleagues he once trusted. At first, Brooke Hogan, his daughter, defended her father publicly, even writing a poem about him on Facebook. But as the scandal grew, the bond between father and daughter weakened. What started as a defense eventually turned into distance, and that distance grew into estrangement. Their relationship, once close, fell apart completely. Nick witnessed all of this up close. The scandal left wounds that didn't heal quickly. Hogan eventually sued Gawker for violating his privacy, and though he won a staggering $140 million, the case was later settled for $31 million. That settlement was one of the key reasons Gawker went bankrupt. Hogan had also sued Bubba the Love Sponge, a man who had once been like a brother to him. Bubba later apologized, admitting that Hogan didn't know about the camera and had no role in releasing the footage. Even though the case was settled, the damage to their friendship was permanent. Two men who had once been inseparable became lifelong enemies. Despite everything, the humiliation, the betrayals, and the lawsuits, Hogan's love for his family stayed intact. In one of his final interviews, he admitted he regretted parts of his wrestling career, opening up in a way fans rarely saw. He spoke not only about the toll wrestling took on his body, but also about his struggle with prescription drug addiction. It was one of the few times people saw him vulnerable, speaking openly about pain that was deeper than physical injuries. For Bubba, the fallout was just as severe. He claimed the scandal ruined his career, cost him his job, and made his audience shrink. He even admitted that the stress drove him into suicidal thoughts. Nick, meanwhile, had to watch his father carry the emotional and financial weight of this betrayal. The man who once trusted almost everyone now trusted almost no one. Hogan became cautious, guarded, and unwilling to ever open himself up in the same way again. That scandal wasn't just a one-time event, it set a pattern that would follow Hulk Hogan for the rest of his life. Again and again, people who claimed to care about him ended up betraying him for money, fame, or personal gain. Nick saw this happen not only with friends, but also inside the family, in business deals, and eventually during Hogan's final illness. But the scandal wasn't the first betrayal Hogan endured. Long before this, his choices had created a ripple effect that would haunt him for decades. One of the most damaging moments came in the 1980s, not from an enemy, but from a decision he made to protect himself. In 1986, fellow wrestler Jesse Ventura tried to unionize wrestlers in WWE, believing they deserved better pay, protection, and long-term benefits. He held a secret meeting with about 20 wrestlers and pushed them to stand together. They had leveraged the upcoming WrestleMania 2 was going to bring in huge attention. But the plan fell apart the very next day. WWE owner Vince McMahon confronted Ventura, saying he already knew everything. Later, Ventura discovered the truth. It was Hogan who had told McMahon. That revelation didn't come until years later, during a 1991 court case. Under oath, McMahon admitted Hogan had been the one who revealed Ventura's plan. Decades later, in a Netflix series, Hogan himself admitted it. He said that when he learned Jesse was trying to organize a union, he went straight to Vince and told him, for Ventura, this wasn't just a professional loss, it was a personal betrayal. He had considered Hogan a friend, which made the backstabbing even harder to accept. Ventura later explained that Hogan did it to protect his own place at the top of WWE. That single decision helped kill the idea of unionizing wrestlers, setting the labor movement in wrestling back for decades. Betrayals weren't limited to Hogan's professional life. His personal life was equally painful, especially for Nick. Hogan's marriage to Linda ended in 2009 after years of fighting, accusations, and infidelity. The most painful part was that one of the affairs involved Christiane Plant, a close friend of Brooke who had worked on her music career. For Brooke, the affair felt like a double betrayal from her father and from someone she trusted. Linda filed for divorce in 2007, and Hogan later admitted he didn't even hear about it from her directly, but from a reporter during a phone call. The divorce battle was ugly. Linda ended up with about 70% of their liquid assets and 40% of his companies. But the money wasn't what hurt the most, the emotional scars were far worse. Their private pain became public entertainment, plastered across tabloids. Nick had to watch his family fall apart in the most humiliating way possible. As years went by, the betrayals didn't stop. The most tragic came during Hogan's final months in 2025. After major spinal surgery, his health declined quickly, but instead of being surrounded by honesty and care, Nick watched a cover-up unfold. People close to Hogan tried to hide the truth of his condition. They cared more about protecting his public image than about letting him have an honest farewell. Wrestling fans, his colleagues, and even some of his family were left in the dark until the sudden news of his death. For Nick, it was painful to realize that Bubba, the man who had once betrayed his father, was, in the end, one of the few who dared to speak the truth about Hogan's health. Those who claimed to love Hogan most chose to lie. That deception robbed Hogan of the chance to be honored properly before his death and robbed fans of the chance to say goodbye. When the announcement of his passing came, even respected journalists and industry insiders were shocked. The truth had been hidden so deeply that almost no one outside his inner circle knew how bad things were. Fans at Comic-Con cried openly when they heard the news, proving just how much he still meant to them. Tributes poured in from around the world, from WWE itself, from Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, from politicians like Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Many of them spoke about the larger-than-life figure Hulk Hogan had been, a man who inspired millions of fans. But the question remains, how many of those tributes would have been different if people had known the full truth of his final months? How many conversations, visits, or acts of kindness were lost because of the cover-up? In the end, Hulk Hogan died not surrounded by love and truth, but by secrecy and betrayal. For Nick, the most painful part wasn't just losing his father, it was knowing that the man the world saw as a hero had been denied the dignity of honesty in his last days.